What up, everybody, and welcome back to the Nerd Generation. I'm your host, Pablo, and joining me, as always, is Mr. Brian Schultz. Brian, today we're going to talk a little bit something different. We're not going to do the Nerd Gen report right now. We're going to talk about something that we've been wanting to talk about for a minute. You finally got to read it. We're going to talk about this book right here. This book which is called Before the Batman, an original movie novel, and it was written by David Lumen, and is a sort of, if it's inspired by the movie, and it's sort of like a prequel to the film. Brian, you read it finally. I read it the first day I got it, and I liked it because this is not a Batman story, but it's talking about Bruce Wayne and his psyche and where sort of he's coming from. So we sort of get like the origin of this character from the Batman film. Also, they explore Paul Dano's character. That was a pretty interesting sort of story. And I think we'll get some context when we see the film. And I think we've also seen some indication of how Paul Dano's character knows the Batman in this film. Brian, what did you think of the book? Go ahead, tell me what you thought.
So I think the to give people a little context of what's in this book versus what's not. The book skips around a little bit. There's a piece of it that's sort of when Bruce is young, his parents are still alive. We have a bit of that.
Yeah.
But it really, similar to I think what Matt Reeves is trying to create here, it does not give you the blow by blow of the murder, right?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of gives you a pre-parents murder and then sort of a post-parents murder, but it gives you their Matt Reeves version of Batman Begins without putting it on screen. That's kind of how I thought about it, right? If you think about, like, if you go back to Batman Begins, the period where Bruce kind of comes back to Gotham and is starting to put together his equipment and isn't quite Batman yet. Version of that is in this story. We'll talk about, it's very different, but that's the period of time that this book covers.
Mm-hmm.
And my number one takeaway, I don't know if you were thinking about it in these terms, but I know we're going to use it as a segue to preview the movie. I am 1,000% glad that none of this is in the movie. That's my number one take, was like, it was enjoyable to read, and I'm so glad it's in the pages and it's not going to be taking up 30 minutes of the 3
screen
hours.
time. Yeah, I definitely I was happy about reading it, and I guess it informs us about the character without having to see it on screen, and I think that's going to be important, because obviously in the movie we already said, and people have said, that we're going to see a lot of Batman. But we're not going to see, I guess, his beginnings. We'll get some indication. We'll get some thought-provoking scenarios about what he's thinking and why he's thinking this way. But in the book, what I found interesting, I don't know if they've explored it in other iterations of Bruce Wayne, but they talk about him growing up and being teased. And it's crazy, like the guy who's rich, beyond rich, right, is still having to go through that stage of being bullied and being looked at as different, even though you have everything at the world at your disposal. So he went through that. And what I found interesting, Brian, is when Alfred in the book is teaching him, or has taught him, how to fight, and at a very young age, because he was a military guy, right? Did it say specifically he was special ops or something like that?
Well, he basically is James Bond. right? For lack of a better description. I mean, he
Yeah.
basically is described as, they don't call him an MI6 officer. They call him a British intelligence officer. That's
Okay.
basically a spy. That's basically what James Bond is.
Yeah.
Alfred is. I actually think Alfred, there's some really helpful context in this book. You mentioned the training. So this book dispenses, it seems, with the League of Shadows as sort of the architect of Bruce's martial arts. It actually
Yeah.
frames Alfred as the foundation, and then Bruce kind of then travels around and
Which I
adds
found
elements
fascinating.
to the style, which is an interesting choice, right? Alfred is actually his sensei, effectively.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
that's a really interesting diversion from the stories that we've typically gotten. But Alfred is, and I don't know, Alfred to me, he's more Batman than Batman in this story. He knows everything. He is
Right.
aware of everything.
Right.
He's kind of letting it play out, but
Yeah.
like Alfred is framed as this, like he's always a step ahead. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. He's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really a butler at all in this.
What I found so interesting in reading in this book is about how he, in terms of fighting, because he did similar things with regards to his education when it came to certain specialties that he wanted to learn. But
Hmm?
with fighting, I found it interesting that that obsession aspect of him, of knowing from the best, whoever's living that can teach him to fight in whatever style, is um builds it up for me anyway to see what it's going to look like on screen. Because I don't know if you saw, Brian, and I don't want to jump ahead too far ahead into the movie, but they released another scene with him and Catwoman doing her thing and burglarizing some spot, and them two getting at it and fighting. And the way they filmed the fighting reminds me of um, what I used to see back in the day, and with some good martial arts fights, even movies that necessarily weren't good, but still they showed you the fight and their skill. It wasn't cut, 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 cut. It wasn't that craziness that we're used to seeing now. Um, but Brian, what did you think about that piece in terms of him, in terms of educating himself and what he did at a moment's notice when he felt necessary to do so?
Yeah, I think it goes back to everything Matt Reeves has told us about this being such a tactile, tangible, grounded world. I think he's trying to find like the foundational pieces of the world's greatest detective from a pretty young age, which is why like he takes such an interest in chemistry and forensic. It talks about him just sort of doing it more as a student, right? And not really necessarily thinking ahead to being a crime fighter, but it sort of hatches that idea of like, well, these are things that he was interested in. But I think, yeah, when when you think of, I think what the decision to not have the League of Shadows be a part of this is really, like I said, rooted in this idea of, as cool as it may have looked in the Chris Nolan verse and in some of the comics, there is something supernatural and Mount Olympusy of like you're climbing this hill and this secret, cadre of ninjas is going to teach you everything you need to know, right? Versus use the world around you, find the masters of all the martial arts and just integrate it. Dude, basically, this is effectively what
Yeah,
Bruce Lee did in real
yeah,
life,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
it. And that they gave it to Bruce Wayne, and you're like, this is going to be what becomes like his fighting style, and it's a little more believable. Like I actually like they made a mention of his training, where they're like all of his training is for lean strength and speed, right? This idea
Yes,
that he's not going to be bulky, right? He's going to be really quick. Again, it's the Bruce
the
Lee
hair for
mantra.
the
Like he
look.
incredibly strong, but like you look at him and like he's not built, you
Yeah,
know. And so I think everything there, everything is there. All the pieces are there to make sense of like why Pattinson probably physically looks the way he does
exactly.
when we get to see him in this film. So,
Another thing that I found interesting with regards to his education, he would not finish a certain school just to go learn from a specific professor at another school. So he was going off learning these subjects, chemistry, I guess whatever enhanced his ability in terms of deducing and doing detective work, because he liked doing that stuff.
yeah.
Now, in other iterations, the only other one that sort of showed that part of the character was Keaton's Batman, when he figured out the chemistry behind Joker's poison with
Mhm.
the makeup stuff and all that. So
But
that I found.
none of the but see you what you like in this book is that none of the Bruce Waynes that we've seen on screen were given a backstory that had like academics as a part of their right, like even like Christian Bale, like he's at Princeton, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But like there's no scenes at Princeton, there's no mention
yeah.
of what he likes to do there, like what he's like as a so this kind of this idea of like he's not really a college student, he's more of like a nomadic like learner. He just sort of drops into labs and like because he has enough money, he gives. I don't know if that's the best reflection on the higher education system, but he can kind of circulate wherever he wants to
Yes,
learn
go,
whatever he
yeah,
wants. But
yeah,
I think it all feeds into this, as you said, like he's an obsessive learner. Like he just sort of whatever he's interested in, like he's all in and trying to find mastery of that, which as you project forward, you're like, yeah, if you're going to be this lone ranger type of vigilante, like you're probably going to be lost and absorbed in sort of these skills at different points in time. So no, I thought it was super cool, and like I said, I'm glad that we'll just get Pattinson's interpretation because no doubt he knows all this, right? Like he's been
mm-hmm,
given this backstory, and
mm-hmm.
I'll just love that we're going to drop in and see like where's he at after
Right
having
now.
learned all this, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I think also they keep going back to, because if you look at what we've seen so far in the Batman is sort of a weirdo, right? And you said this in one of our shows. He's like, who is this guy? You know, he looks strange or whatever. And he seems not to be able to relate to anyone else, obviously, because of what he went through. He probably never met someone that lost both their parents and someone who can talk to. The only people he can really talk to is Alfred, I guess, right? And and then just go about learning the stuff that he wants to learn because he wants to. I don't think in the book it really sort of explores what he wants to be. Probably a little bit towards the end. I don't know if you got that sense, but they keep harping back also to people recognizing him and seeing just a rich kid that has it all and not being taken seriously because there aren't any issues that he's going through that needs that much serious attention or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, I think the book, one of the realistic costs of being as nomadic as he is how would you ever form any meaningful relationships if you're never in a spot, right? You're never around the same people. There's no way for you to connect, certainly at a younger age. In fact, I mean, there's only one character in this book he connects with, which I think is an interesting discussion as to like whether that character is going to
That'll
appear
be
in this
interesting.
film or in the universe because they spent a lot of time on her, and I was
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
are we supposed to take from this book that this character is somebody meaningful and named something else maybe down the road? But he really doesn't have a connection with anyone else, and that may be part of where you feel the absence of parents, right? I mean, he doesn't, parents who were billionaires never had the opportunity to educate him on like how to kind of navigate a society that has preconceived notions about who he is and what he's like. And so a lot of this story I think is about misunderstanding, both from the standpoint of him and from the standpoint of the Riddler, which uh, I think it's interesting that the rumor mill around this movie is that he and Selena Kyle have crossed paths and known each other since they were kids, because this book very clearly establishes that he and the Riddler didn't know each other, but they connected in the same space and time when they were kids. Like
Yes,
that's
yes.
something that seems very important that's going to be brought probably flashed back or brought forward in this movie. But I thought that was a really interesting sort of parallel that they set up here.
Yeah. I don't know, presume to think that Selena is Dex.
It crossed my mind, but I don't think so. But it crossed my mind whether that was supposed to be that. But
And if it isn't her, I'm pretty sure Selena Kyle reminds him
of yeah,
of that. Yeah. So
yeah,
one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing, because they spent a lot of time on Bruce's obsession with making this car
yeah.
faster, louder, powerful. And it just makes me more excited to see what this car is going to look and sound like.
Yeah, no, and it is the muscle car, so it's the one you see in the trailer. This is it, and it's the origin of this car that he's worked on for years, basically, before it becomes the Batmobile. I think it also speaks to, we had obviously heard in the lead up to this movie, like he designs that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
He does all the work in this. There's no cue to his bond, right? Like he's building his own suit. He's making the car and fine tuning it and customizing it. Even Alfred, like for all of his skills, really isn't involved, at least in the book. He's not involved at all in terms of the craft of the weapons and the suit and all. This is all Bruce on his own, building his own stuff, which I think is, usually we see Batman as being outfitted, right? Whether it's Lucius Fox, whether it's Alfred, like he usually is getting help from third parties. It's the first time we basically seen like, nah, Bruce from a young age is basically like he gets his hands dirty, does no work.
Yeah. What's cool about the book is that it talks about how he gains access to this tech, the phone calls that he has to make, and the awkwardness for
Right.
him asking, you know, can I get access to this? And the guy was questioning, and it's cool the way he like sort of, he's talking to us all himself, saying how he should play it, right?
Yeah.
So that he doesn't. That to me is cool. It sort of helps me more look deeper into when we actually see him, how he works and thinks. I wonder if the movie is going to be, if we're going to see some sort of how we watch Goodfellas and stuff,
Yeah.
and do you think it's going to be something like that?
I don't know if it's going to be. I mean, Goodfellas is a different genre. I'd be a little.
Yeah, but
this is not going for the crime, that
but,
side of crime. I don't
but,
think.
but with respect to him talking things out, and us
Oh,
like him talking to
you mean the narrator?
the narration,
Self
yes, yes,
narrator.
yes.
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that as a device. That's a risky device. There are certain movies that do it very well. Obviously, you referenced Goodfellas is a good one. Um, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if we're going to see that. I don't know if we're going to see that. Like we're in his head, and like what it.
We're
That
getting a
would be
lot
an
of Batman.
Yeah, we'll
We're getting
talk
a lot
about
of
that as
Batman.
we get into the full preview. That's definitely a creative choice. But yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah,
I wonder if we will see that.
That'll be interesting. We also get a sort of sneak peek into the Penguin here.
And organized crime. I actually think this
Yes.
was important because they changed the pecking order of organized crime, at least relative to what most people are going to understand. So go ahead.
How did they change it? You go tell me.
Well, I'm just saying people who have experienced this only through the movies will have remembered that it was Carmine Falcone was the original crime boss,
Yeah.
who was then imprisoned. Sal Maroni is the underboss who takes over, and obviously we never got to see a Penguin and Oswald Cobblepot in the Nolanverse. But obviously in the Burton universe, Cobblepot was kind of like his own thing. Like he just had his own organization. So this very clearly establishes Maroni as the original boss, who is then replaced after his arrest. It sounds kind of or what by Falcone, who we're going to get in this movie as John Turturro. So he called him the number 2, becoming the number 1. And the Penguin is very much established as like a junior. He's kind of like a junior boss. He's like a mid-level, he's not a thug. He's not a street thug. He's not like a low-level guy.
Yeah.
But he's not like the chief yet either. Like he's definitely like a lieutenant kind of. So that's an interesting like hierarchy there as far as like setting what we think Colin Farrell is going to be doing in this movie.
If you think back, and this character that I'm about to mention was probably lower than that, but in the Batman the animated series, the Joker was sort of one of those street guys. If you remember in Batman the animated series, which is very interesting. So we got that little bit of insight into the Penguin and his, I guess, position, whether I mean, this may be his second year, so he may be on the rise in this film, or we may see his ambition shown to us that hopefully leads us to that series that we're going to get on HBO Max sometime in the near future. Um, we also got a sneak peek into where his lair is located. So you know how people, when they have these penthouses, the elevator goes up to their apartment. These people had a train stop. Bruce Wayne's family had a train stop, so they built this whole subway system, and I guess the last stop or a special stop was their home, and I believe that is where we'll have Batman's lair, so to speak, right? Because his home in these
His
books,
original one,
his original one is an orphan, isn't it?
Well, it moves, I think, because it say by the end it moves underneath Wayne
Towers
Tower?
or
Yeah, because I gotta get these, because Wayne Manor gets sold, becomes the orphanage, which ironically or coincidentally is what happened at the end of Dark Knight Rises, right? That's what they did. Spoiler alert, it doesn't last very long. So Wayne Manor, it's interesting because Wayne Manor we're going to see in the Flash movie, which is not connected to this. But Wayne Manor, it doesn't seem like is going to figure in this universe. Instead, we have Wayne Tower, and then you said he does his original Batcave, for lack of a better word, at the train station. But then it seems like when Alfred is brought into the operation, they migrate that underneath Wayne Tower. That's what it seemed like. So in the movie, I'm guessing the shots we've gotten of what looks like the Batcave, I'm guessing that's under the tower, not in the train station, but we'll see.
Got it. I mean, it makes sense because it's not like in all the iterations of Batman, he is always living like somewhere in like some sort of suburban
waterfall,
mad far, right? It's like if he sees the bat signal, how long it's going to take him a minute to get there. So him being in the city makes sense, right? It makes perfect sense. Paul Dano's character, Edward Nashon, is a little bit opposite of Bruce Wayne. He doesn't have a lot of money, but he sort of goes through the circumstances of being picked on for being different, for being a loner. We definitely get the origin of how he's sort of obsessed with riddles, with words.
Yep.
Yes. So it'll be interesting if I would assume that they will at some point. He may say something how he's always been infatuated with puzzles and words and stuff like that. But they describe that picture that we see of a young Edward Nashon and young Bruce Wayne in the trailers. His father, Bruce Wayne, at that time when they were young, was running for mayor,
which I thought was interesting too, because that's not always the case. Thomas Wayne's not always in public office.
Exactly. And they announced it in that orphanage, I believe.
Yep.
And while he is announcing it, I believe that is the moment that Edward is looking at Bruce Wayne.
Right.
And he narrates in the book of how, you can sort of tell his distaste for rich kids who have it all, right, or seem to have it all. But he was a loner. He did things on his own. He was another weirdo, so to speak. But as he grows up, he figures he wants to get a regular job or whatever as an accountant, because if it offers him the opportunity to solve stuff.
Yeah.
Right. But there was one night, I believe, that he saw, I guess he almost got hit by a car in the book. And I believe
not just any car, but yeah.
Was it Bruce Wayne's car or was it the
No,
other.
it's just one of the cars from the race. We'll talk about that whole.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Really
So
glad that's not in the movie, but we'll talk about.
I know, right? It's because
They'd have gotten
man,
some flack for that. Yeah,
of course, of course.
yeah,
So Paul Dano in the book and Bruce Wayne in the book, Bruce Wayne especially meets a person, and he's trying out his car and stuff like that. And he meets a person that's into cars, that's into racing, and I guess they get to know each other through that vehicle, so to speak. And because he gets almost run over by a car and feels that the owner of the car, the person driving the car, didn't give a damn about human lives or whatever, and this guy could have killed him, and he just looks at him as privileged individuals and decides to put a pipe bomb at the in Dex's car. And he also does some craziness with the orphanage too, which already plants the seeds of how far this guy is willing to go to be noticed and not to get caught doing bad things. What did you think of Edward Nashon in this book?
So there's some things I really like. There's a little bit of this that's a little bit cliche in the sense of the rejected outsider who then kind of seeks revenge on the society that cast him out. That's a little cliche.
Yeah.
The part that I liked though was that initial look, because they tell you that scene from both kids' standpoints, right? And so
Yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
Bruce's standpoint, it's a look of genuine, like, I want to I want to seem polite to this kid who's staring at me, but I don't quite know how to respond, so I sort of half smile at him.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Riddler interprets that as he's mocking me. So you kind of get the, like, that the DNA what Bruce is doing is actually he's just trying to be polite, but he's
Yeah.
awkward because he's a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And Edward Nash's response is like, look at that rich, pretty mother. Like, that's basically his response. So you get the two sides of the same scene. And then that, I think what it leads you down is, I think what this movie is going to try to do is try to show you that these two guys are actually a lot more similar than you want to realize, right? Because it's the idea of, like, Bruce is an outsider and he's awkward. Edward's an outsider and he's awkward, but for very different reasons because they have very different backgrounds. And so, Bruce is a forensics guy through chemistry, like Edward is a forensics guy through numbers. Like, they're giving you a lot of these parallels that then lead to the motivation for why one chooses to exist outside a system, but in a way that's helpful ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
versus one exists outside the system and ultimately is like, well, I want to destroy the system.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's where we're going with it. There was a little bit of this in Dark Knight, right, where, like, Heath Ledger kind of tells Christian Bale, like, we're the same. He basically, like, we're the same, we're not that different.
Yeah,
That idea, like, we may look different, but we're not that different. I think this movie seemingly is trying to set these two guys up as, like, they seem like polar opposites, but they have a lot more in common than you realize. And so that's the part of this that I liked. I did like that Edward Nashon has a real job. I thought that was pretty fun. Like, imagine this guy, like, trying to find fraud in, like, all these documents, and then, like, in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, this guy's gonna try to, literally spoiler, he destroys Wayne Manor
Yeah.
to the ground. So I think it's sort of an interesting, again, a grounded choice, but an interesting choice. So
I wonder. I wonder if in this movie does he know he's Bruce Wayne? Does he know that? Does he know that Batman is Bruce Wayne in this movie?
the implication from the trailer is he does, because there's a point at which
The implication.
He calls him
Yes.
Bruce at some point. So,
Yes.
but I guess it's not totally clear. Is he speaking to Bruce or is he speaking to Batman as Bruce? We don't know that.
Exactly. So I would assume that we may get a confession from him in terms of who burnt down Wayne Manor, right? That'll
Yeah.
be interesting. That'll be interesting. Um, but there was something else about Bruce Wayne that I found interesting towards the end of the book. I mean, his conversation or his means of communication with officers in terms of giving them intel and people who don't know who is delivering evidence, because when the pipe bomb exploded in the car, he looked at it and wanted to take a
Right.
sample so they can do some forensics work on it, right?
And it's not Gordon. It's interesting that like this
Yes,
book
I thought it was going to be Gordon, right?
does not bring Jim Gordon into this at all. Alfred's
Yes,
contact at the Gotham Police Department is another lieutenant.
yes, which
So,
makes us really like understand that Gordon is not going to be. I think Gordon is going to probably be commissioned in the third movie.
Jeffrey Wright has already confirmed he's lieutenant in this.
He's lieutenant, right? But in the
Yeah.
third movie, he'll probably be, for me.
Oh, I don't know. But he said he's not
yeah,
commissioner
yeah,
yet.
yes. So, and I like that part. And I like that part because I think in
I think
Batman,
what Jeffrey Wright said is that it made sense because the story demanded that Gordon be in the streets.
yes,
And he was like, the police commissioner would never be like on a beat, right? He would never be a beat cop. So they had to justify what would get Gordon into the field, and so he couldn't be that high rank.
Yes. So after doing his investigation on the pipe bomb, he delivers some evidence to the cop, not himself. I think I think he mails it in. I don't know what he does.
He just sends a package, and then he gives Lieutenant Dure, I guess her name is, a place to send it back. That's not a mailbox. Yeah.
Yes. So without knowing who the person is, the people who do this for a living in terms of creating, looking at the evidence and stuff like that, said about Bruce, this guy knows what he's doing. Whoever he is, he knows what he's doing. When I read that, that put a smile on my face. Like, Bruce Wayne is gonna be, he's gonna be on it. He's gonna be like an intense Sherlock Holmes, like just looking at stuff.
100%. And by the way, Sherlock Holmes was a nut.
Yes.
If you read the books, he's an outsider. I don't think Bruce Wayne's going to be a drug addict, but like Sherlock Holmes is a different cat. Like he's a genius, but he's just different. And I think you're getting the same flavor here.
Yeah, definitely. And his interactions with the cop in terms of, what he thinks is going on. I liked the back and forth. But we already start to see his cooperation, so to speak, with Gotham police. What were your thoughts on reading some of those interactions?
Yeah, it's funny because there's also a naivety there because he obviously goes to Alfred for help. It's Alfred's contact. So he knows he can trust this person. But we know the Gotham police force is always corrupt. and we know that in this movie, there's going to be bad cops. Actually, there's I don't know if have you seen the clip where he kind of fake fights Gordon in the prison?
You think it's a fake fight?
Yeah, it's definitely like not fake, but like he's doing it for a purpose. He's trying to draw out.
Definitely.
He's not hitting Gordon because he hates Gordon. He's hitting Gordon to achieve an effect. But that conversation they have beforehand, he's labeling one of the cops as a suspect. Like he basically tells you, like, I saw this guy like at some spot that we don't really understand. So we know half the cops are bad in this movie. Yeah. So it's just already like he's helping the police, but it's like, does the book's version of Bruce Wayne understand like how corrupt the police force is? Probably not at this point.
Yeah.
So, as I said, a little bit naive, and just the fact is he's trusting Alfred, and Alfred probably has a legitimate on the level cop to help him.
Yeah. What I also found great in this book is what was it? Damn, I had it on the tip of my tongue. I was thinking about it as you were speaking. The hero side of him, the good guy in him with helping Dex. He's a much older Bruce Wayne, I think, like pretty much almost year one, I would say, or year one.
I think at the end of the book, he's probably within months of where the movie starts.
Okay.
That was my impression.
Okay.
Because the end of the book, the end of the book, the bat signal exists. he has this. He has the bat. He now has the
The
cowl.
cow. Okay.
I don't think he has the cape yet,
No.
but he basically has his name. He is Batman at this point. So I think that's pretty much a lead into the film. I think we're in
Yes.
year 2 or like a couple months before wherever this story is gonna go.
But you get that um Batman doing the right thing for those for people, for people he cares about, and think because his, you know, he wants to help out because he knows that Dex is not a bad person and she's doing it because of the circumstances that were given to her. She's doing what she's doing. I think she's selling some sort of mysterious military grade powder or whatever the case may be, or explosive.
Right.
And the investigation that he goes into finding out the pieces of the puzzle to find out where this is coming from is to me is dope. Um, but
Yeah, and he also finds out Dex's motivation, which is her
yes,
father being in prison. And so once he puts that puzzle together, that leads him to say, I'm gonna, even though Dex is engaged in criminal activity, I'm basically gonna try to bail her out. I'm gonna
yeah,
try to actually get her out of this and
yeah,
save her dad.
yeah. So
Which
that's
again led me to that felt like something that might get carried forward later
you
on,
think?
whether it's in this, I don't know, it just had this feel of like that's a storyline that could come back, like either that character pops up or like the situation with the dad doesn't play out exactly. Just something, it felt like there was something there to weave into the film narrative, if they, maybe not in this film, but just something that they could use later on. Although I will say, as I said to you, the piece of this book I'm so glad is not in the film, above all else, is the Fast and Furious street race. That would have, this movie would have taken mad heat from people if they had tried to throw in a legit, because it's a legit street race. Like that's what they're doing. It's not the street race from like Fast and Furious 1. It's more like the one from like Fast and Furious 4, where they're like in the city streets at night, kind of zigging and zagging. That would have been a terrible idea to put like 5 minutes of a set piece into that. So glad that's not in the movie. But that's how he meets Dex. And also it shows off like he's looking to test his car, right? It shows you like he's looking to test his driving skills in his car, which obviously we know he's going to need later on. So,
yeah. I think one of the exciting things for me is seeing what this car is going to be able to do, how he handles it, how he unleashes it, and how he moves around the city with it. And that's going to be one of the most exciting things for me.
And this car did everything in the film. I sent you some of the link to the interviews. There is no CGI Batmobile in this movie. So when you see the car come through the fire, that is the actual Batmobile being jumped through fire to catch the Penguin's car.
Wow. I'm just
because I heard a clip with Matt Reeves where he said, like, I don't think we can do that. And then the guys who were running sort of cinematography and stunt choreography were like, no, we think we can do that. And then they went and did it, and they shot it from every angle. So that's legit. Like, that is really the bat. Somebody is driving that car through the fire. Not Pattinson, but somebody is. So
again, I really enjoy the little tidbits of this book that gives us more information about the movie. When you read it, Brian, did you get more excited for the film, or are you still the same in terms of excitement for this film?
I would say more, but obviously it gets you're kind of bumping up against the ceiling. But I think aspects of it, like I said, the Alfred aspect, I continue to get more excited when I saw what his background was, when I read how he's kind of interplaying with Bruce as he gets older. Like, I love it. Like, that part I'm like eating up, and I can't wait to see Andy Serkis kind of bring that to life. I think it added to my excitement for the Riddler. I think it gave the Riddler like purpose. It gave him a little more context, as opposed, we've heard the Zodiac, we've heard the serial killer, but aspect of this. But I think this did give you this, like, as I said, this parallel track from a very young age. So I think those would be probably, and I think that, like I said, we talked about the third thing was Bruce's curiosity. I think the third thing was just like how Bruce became Bruce as a person. I think it really feeds your excitement of like, yeah, okay, I could see how we get from the person in this story to sort of this, part crazy, part heroic, part genius, part madman, quite honestly. Like that's what it seems
Mhm.
like that we're gonna
Mhm.
get in this film. I think the book really does a nice job of setting the stage for that. So I think all of that, like, yeah, I mean, I would encourage everyone if they have a few minutes. It's a pretty easy read, as you said. Like, I don't think you have to read it to enjoy the
Yeah.
movie, obviously, but like I don't think it'll help. It might help your enjoyment of it a little bit.
I think so too, especially for Edward Nashton, because you see how extreme he's willing to go to sort of get back at those, I guess, his tormentors, and those who feel that they're above the law, so to speak, right? You see what he goes through. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how if he tells his story, especially if when Batman and him with the when he's behind the glass and stuff, and he's
Yeah.
talking to Batman. It'll be interesting to see if he talks about that torment, about being different, and how he almost got run over by a kid in their car. It'll be interesting to hear that if that comes. For me, that's what I think makes it more even exciting if to hear that, because he's gonna have to explain his motivations, right? He's
And
gonna have to
probably
talk about it.
well, I mean, he also wants to. I mean, part of the
Yeah,
Zodiac sending these communications to the public was this idea of like he couldn't just do it in private. He wanted people to know. He wanted to leave the clues, right? So
yeah,
the Riddler doesn't want Bruce to be in the dark. He wants him to kind of partly be in the know. So yeah, of course he wants to let him, remind him of the personal connections that he might know that Bruce doesn't, and so forth. So um so I don't know if you want to segue a little bit into sort of previewing the movie because we're less than a week away. Here's a question after reading this book. Prediction. What do you think happens to Edward Nashton in this movie? Is he at the end of the movie, is he dead? B, at large? C, imprisoned in like Arkham? And what do you want after having read the book and as you go into the movie?
that's a good question. If I had to pick one, this is tough. I mean, I would assume that Batman gets his man at the end of the day, possibly. But the Riddler is a clever person. I don't know if you ever saw Phone Booth.
Yeah, another Colin Farrell movie back when Colin
Yes.
Farrell was like the man.
Yeah, he was doing everything.
Yeah.
Um, at the end of that movie, they didn't find the shooter. If you saw Phone Booth at the end of the movie, if you remember, I believe it's Kiefer Sutherland. They didn't find him. He was smart because he was putting all sort of contingencies in place so that he doesn't get caught. And at the end of the film, he was able to do what he did, because there was a purpose to what he was doing in terms of tormenting Colin Farrell's character in that movie. And he had been doing it, and that he always had a contingency plan, and he escapes. So it would be very interesting if that were to happen. I doubt it though.
Hmm.
I doubt it though. But if they were to do it, it'll be interesting to see how they do it.
I don't think there's any way he dies. 0% chance
Yeah.
to me, especially after reading this book, listening to all the interviews about like the Batverse and all the things they want to do. I think killing him, which is happens as we talk about in so many of the movies, they feel compelled to kill the villain because
Yeah.
that's what people expect. I really don't think that's going to happen in
No,
this
I don't
movie.
think so either.
I think there's so I think you're right. There's probably like I would say 80% chance he ends up in Arkham, like he's caught. I think there's a chance he is at large. And the only reason I say that is because the Zodiac Killer was never caught. And if that's the parallel that Matt Reeves is really drawing, and he's trying to create the universe, would he be bold enough? Now, we know the third act is definitely taking risks based upon the early reactions. Would he be bold enough to have Batman foil the plot but not catch the bad guy? I wonder. And say, like, He's a young Batman. He's not a polished Batman. He effectively he wins the battle but loses the war in
Yeah.
this movie, in the first movie. It'd be an inspired choice,
It'll be
I
very
think.
interesting. It'll be very interesting. It would be so interesting to see if perhaps he's at large and still leaving questions or riddles for him to find out about Court of Owls and who knows?
The other thing that made me think he might get out of this is that he lets himself get caught. We know that.
Oh
He
yes.
allows himself to get caught during the movie, which makes me almost wonder is the broader game that he's going to then escape at the end in some way. Even as Bruce saves the day, he doesn't really he's not able to complete the circle. And so that was, I don't know, when I read this book, I was like, it sort of reinforced that idea of like, why go to all this trouble with all this long DNA in parallel to eliminate this player from the field in the first movie?
And if you read the book, for those of you who haven't read it, if you read the book, you'll get a sense of Paul Dano's satisfaction or his character's satisfaction and with Nashon in not getting caught in doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very interesting. Very interesting, man. That'll be dope if they're able to pull that off.
I actually think it'll be really cool if he gets out of this movie and he's still at large. I think it actually would be a really neat twist on
like a
the
Kaiser
genre.
Soze type
Exactly.
joint. Oh my
Exactly.
god.
Yeah.
Wow, man.
So
Wow.
that'd be an interesting choice. So here's my second question. So Pattinson, when asked what he wants to do in the future, he specifically says Court of Owls. Do you think that's a bait and switch? Like, do you think they're actually setting up Court of Owls? And he already knows that. And he's actually giving you the spoiler. You just don't know it because he's answering the question.
I'd believe it if that were to be the case. I think that is a huge possibility. I think is a very interesting um, um, story to tell because of his connections to his family,
Mm-hmm.
and Bruce having to deal with this and to see him go through this and learning. Obviously, we already see something that happens with him and Alfred, and Bruce discovering some truth that Alfred was omitting, right? But to find out more about the Court of Owls and his and that relationship with his family, who knows if they, had them, like, had, I would say, had a chokehold on them to make them do stuff that they wanted to do. Who knows what that relationship is? But it would be interesting to see if they introduce, because there's a lot of foes for Batman to have to deal with if they go that route.
Yeah, I mean, and it would fit the idea of a grounded, corrupt city, right? This idea that it's been in the control of these select, powerful families, individuals across generations. And the other thing I thought in this book that just made me sort of like got the wheels turning was that whole Thomas Wayne running for mayor, right? Which was he doesn't always do, but would kind of fit. Like if the Wayne family was connected or part of the or like a part of the Court of Owls and a little bit dirty, which it seems like they are based upon the trailers, you wonder if like his public service was tainted in some way along the way. Like it just made me think like, why do that? Like why have that be part of Thomas Wayne's resume unless there was some like ramification of that maybe down the road. So I thought that was an interesting that's an interesting one that's sort of filed away in the back of my mind.
You know what the Court of Owls allows for us to see if they go that route is him as Bruce Wayne, because these people are going to probably be out in the open, and he may have to not only deal with them at night as Batman, but certainly during the day as a businessman, because they're most likely the Court of Owls have their fingers on their hands in a bunch of stuff. And he's going to have to be Bruce Wayne, that businessman, because this is one thing in the comic books that Batman says, that he's going to have to face Lex Luthor in something that he's equally does well at, and that's in business. I'm paraphrasing, but that moment in the comics was so cool, and I'd like to see that Bruce Wayne and Batman persona.
So good segue to the Matt Reeves quote that Robert Pattinson is basically in every shot of this movie. What's your reaction when you hear that? Like, why does
When
that
I,
change your expectation of how this film is going to play out?
But when I hear that, it made me ask the question of whether we're gonna hear Batman sort of thinking out loud and narrating his process and how he thinks, how he sees things, how he's putting stuff together. So because I think it'll be, because if you look at Batman in this film, for the most part, he doesn't say a lot. But when he's by himself, is he quiet or is he talking to himself? Even if he's talking to himself mentally, are we hearing that? So being that there's going to be a lot of Batman, that's the consistent thing that I've been hearing. That I think we're going to get something like that. Um, but again, give me Batman. Give me Batman in all of his glory, his mentals, and everything. I want to know as much as I can about this live action version of it.
Well, I think it is going to be, it's a choice in the sense of, I think one of the biggest criticisms of the cinematic role of Batman to this point has been, at some point along the way, Batman invariably gets upstaged by his rogues. That has always happened, right? Whether it was Jack Nicholson to Michael Keaton,
Yeah.
whether it was, I mean, not as good, but like Jim Carrey to Val Kilmer, whether it was Heath Ledger to Christian Bale. The choice Matt Reeves is alluding to prevents that. It literally prevents that. This is it's called The Batman for a reason, I guess, which is that this will be Batman's story from start to finish.
He's a star.
As good as Paul Dano may be, as good as Jeffrey Wright may be, there is no room for them to upstage an actor who's literally in every scene of his own movie. So this movie, in some ways, is more, and when I hear that, is more reminiscent of like The Revenant or The Martian, or these movies where it's like, we're gonna put our ace in every scene, and the movie is gonna live or die based upon whether he can carry 3 hours on screen.
Wow. Just putting that in, just hearing those words, 3
Right, that's
hours.
Leo and Matt Damon, right? That's
Yeah.
Leo and Matt Damon. Those are two of the best actors of our, of the last 35 years. And you're saying Robert Pattinson, I believe in this guy. So Matt Reeves is saying, I believe this guy can reach that level in this movie to make this movie go for 3 hours.
Castaway. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, great example. Hanks, we know, can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is going to be very, very, very interesting uh, thing to behold in terms of seeing Bruce Wayne, and not a Bruce Wayne that we've seen before. This is not gonna be the suave business. No, this is gonna be again a weird Bruce Wayne, and I hope to see that transformation, or at least at the end see the beginnings of what I believe he thinks he needs to be, or he's how he sees he needs to be as Bruce Wayne.
Well, I think you're going to see, we see it a little bit in the trailer, but I think you're going to see it a lot, which is he clearly is more comfortable when he's Batman.
Yes.
You can tell in the scenes when his dialogue, he's more at ease speaking, interacting with Gordon. That's what we generally see when he's in costume. When he's out of costume, he seems like a fish out of water in the little bits that we've seen. And that, I think, is what you're going to see a lot of on screen, is like he's uncomfortable when he's not the persona.
And in the book, they sort of emphasize that too, in terms of putting on a hat and sort of hiding himself so that he's not recognized, and people are really actually taking him seriously. So I think the I guess when he's Batman, he's open in terms of speaking.
I think that's right. He's freely himself in that movie.
Yes, exactly.
But that's what I think is great about the detective aspect, as I said, is he can be the detective as Batman. He doesn't have to be just a ninja as Batman. And I love the few clips we've gotten where he's clearly trying to solve the crime. He's just wearing the costume while he's doing it. And that, I think, is awesome. That's tense. I'm expecting a lot of scenes where we're kind of like, there's not a lot physically happening, but there's a lot narrative happening, almost like you're watching CSI, right? You're watching like one of these shows where like he's in a room or something, he's trying to figure something out, but he's not hand to hand with anyone, but there's a lot of drama. Like you're really like gripping your chair because you're trying to, be in the room with him figuring
Yeah,
it out.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think is one of the things, because we're getting a lot of Batman in this movie, pretty much in every scene. It reminds me of the Batman animated season, Batman animated series,
Yeah.
where is mostly Batman doing
Yes.
his detective work and figuring, yo, that Batman the animated series for me is like is up there with the X-Men
Yeah.
and perhaps some other stuff. Um, but Brian, I just can't wait for this movie.
Um, Other things that have come out that I think are interesting we want to get to. The music is being released in bits and pieces as
Yes.
we go here. I love your reaction to that. I'm a big score guy. Michael Giacchino has not historically been one of my favorites, but I
Mhm.
love his theme for Batman in this particular. It's a long piece,
Yeah,
but
I heard it.
I didn't realize that the song that plays at the end of the trailer is actually part of his theme for Batman. But the theme has both a Batman piece and a Bruce Wayne piece. And I heard a quote from Jeffrey Wright where he said, like, if you listen to that piece, kind of cryptic, he said the entire movie is in there. That's what he
Wow.
claimed.
That is there a music? I think there's music for the Penguin. There's
He's
music for
released a track for the Riddler and
yes.
Catwoman. So the Catwoman one is very bluesy and jazzy. It's sort of piano
Okay.
oriented. The Riddler
Okay.
one is very like ethereal. It doesn't really have a melody. It's kind of just creepy.
Yeah.
But the
Okay.
Batman one has three parts, which it has like the thing you hear at the end of the trailer, which is this very kind of like drum beat, kind of relentless theme. And then it has a middle part, which is kind of part sad, part hopeful. And that I think is the Bruce Wayne part. But I think it's one of the better themes he's done. And I think you definitely will feel it feels appropriate. And Matt Reeves said that the music was actually, this is rare, was written before a lot of the movie was shot. Usually a composer gets the film in its rough cut and then writes around that. In this, the music was written before. So Reeves said he played the themes
As he
to
was
the
editing.
actors
Oh,
before they were shooting to
okay.
help frame like their performance. So it's interesting.
Very. There's a lot of care that's being put into this movie, Brian. Matt Reeves, I think he's very, very, very happy that he got this gig, and he's being very careful and being very precise about what he wants to see, what what he wants Batman to do and to be, and give us the Batman that interacts with Selena Kyle a certain way. Um, Gordon, Alfred, and Gotham, and especially to the criminals. He wants Batman to be a certain way with all of these people, and we're gonna see. I hope. I mean, the hope is that we're gonna see that, but I know or feel that and believe that uh, Matt Reeves has looked at all the scenarios and all the variables I think that makes up this character and the other characters surrounding him.
Well, I think he certainly looked at all the visual scenarios. I sent you a couple of clips of that they basically they took the approach of where where can we put a camera? Where is it physically possible to put a camera? And they try to shoot it from every angle, which is why even in the trailer you see some very interesting shots, like when he uses the bat hook. There's clearly a camera that's on the grapple gun looking
That,
down,
yeah,
right, as he goes up. We talked about some of the wide tracking shots for the fighting. It definitely is like a little bit of almost like watching the pages of a comic book, like when he's in the tunnel and it's the machine guns kind of lighting it up and the Batman's kind of fighting. And this camera is not zoomed in, it's zoomed out. So you can kind of see what's going on. Like there's a lot of choice here. So I'm fascinated to see. And I've heard that the red and black uh, colors palette they're using in the trailer, like for the logo, I've heard that that's actually a big thrust of the movie. That the movie is kind of skews like blacks, reds, and grays. There's not a lot of brighter colors in between. So I'm interested to see what that looks like, if that's in fact sort of like how he put this together. So
Yeah.
fascinated with that. But yeah, I think you're right. Like I think it's going to be visually like very, like I said, it's going to be different. I think you're going to be sitting there and like by the end of the movie you'll be really impressed, but your first shots might be like, whoa, this is different. Like this is just not. I'm not in the MCU and I'm not in the DCEU anymore. I'm in something very different.
The Batverse,
Yeah,
as
that's right.
Matt Reeves is calling it.
That's right. That's right.
I said a long time ago that this could be the beginning of something new. I didn't have an idea of what it was. I was hoping probably the DC universe, but just like Spider-Man has pretty much his own universe and sometimes can go into other people's worlds and stuff like that. Same thing with the X-Men. Each of these people have their stories and villains and stuff like that, but Batman has a rich history that you can go at it alone and do it for however long as you want. Um, and that's what I think Matt Reeves sees. So one day, hopefully, we can see a Mr. Freeze. We can see I don't know how they do it, but um, um, Harvey, Two Face, the Joker's apparently, perhaps, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah,
There's rumor.
Barry Keoghan, the rumor. What is he? Yeah.
So there's room for that as well. I saw, and Bane. I would love to see if he does that or that storyline. There's so many things I'm pretty sure Matt Reeves was thinking about, and it recently came out that he says we're already thinking about the sequel. The confidence in this movie, Brian, is crazy, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think Matt Reeves has said all the right things, which is that he's done the work to build the universe, but he's kind of put all his eggs into this movie in the sense of like he's not holding back, right? He's not assuming there will be a chapter two. He's like, I know what chapter two could be. He's like, but I'm not assuming there will be. He's like, I want people to really immerse themselves and enjoy chapter one. And I always, that's always music to my ears. Um, and so I think we're going to get some of the universe no matter what. Obviously, with the Gotham TV show and the Penguin show, we're going to get that. It's been interesting. The box office projections, we've gotten a few other sites. It's a little all over the map, to be honest.
Yeah.
The studio is going conservative. Ignore the studio estimate. They're always going to take the lowest number possible because they always want to be able to declare victory.
Yeah.
I've seen that's as low as like 80 million for opening weekend.
Yeah, I heard that.
I'm not concerned about that. I think north of 100 is for sure. Like, I think it's more of a question of, do we break 150? Do we challenge 175? As I said, like the early shows have all sold out pretty rapidly. So like, I think the buzz on this is definitely like, it's a notch below No Way Home, which you would expect, but it's well above Shang-Chi, Eternals. Like it's well above that level. And I think, like I said, I think it just comes down to the legs. Like if people really respond to this different approach,
yeah,
then I think you're going to see, I went back and checked. So Joker's opening weekend was $96 million. The film went on to make $1.1 billion, right? So it shows you that like, and that was rated R. So it was like people responded and word got out and they were like, I got to go see this, And so I think this movie will be bigger open than that, but could have that kind of effect where it's like it gets people talking once it's out. So it lays down like let's say a 150 number out of the gate. And now people are drawn in. And that's how you kind of get, well north of $1 billion. So, but the budget's only like low ones, right? It's just above $100 million. So like this movie is going to crush it from like a profitability standpoint for no matter what. Like even if it made $500 million, it's hugely profitable. So
yeah. I think I read something that was sort of like an early reaction. I'm taking it with a grain of salt, but it's possible that this movie may be polarizing. I've spoken to people who are not excited about this, Brian. And I pause for a second and wonder, like, how are you not excited about this? And I keep hearing the same things over. Oh, a moody Batman, and we've seen this all before. A serious Batman, and these are the same people that love Peacemaker. And listen, I don't mean to harp on Peacemaker, and we'll talk about it on the Nerd Gen report when we do the news. Um, but get I don't get how you can't be excited for this film. But the possibility of it being polarizing, and some people may not like, some people may like it, some people may not like it. I think the curiosity alone is going to get people to the theaters, even if you don't think you'll like the movie for whatever reason. I think there's going to be enough buzz that you're going to go see it anyway.
Yeah, but that's why I think, this movie is not, it's not for everyone. I mean, that's the one. That's why, like, the No Way Home numbers are not possible, because there, this is an adult film. Like, as I said, there are definitely some families at home that are going to be not excited for this, because they're like, I can't. They're probably going to be a little bit upset, because they're like, I can't in good conscience take my kid to see this. This looks way too intense and violent. My kid's too young, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's PG-13, but it looks like it's about right on the edge of R.
Yeah.
And so, but I think if this movie delivers what it can, the reason why I think Joker is an interesting parallel is that what I would guess happened with Joker a lot was, because that was polarizing. Again, the reviews for Joker were not unilateral. Now, people praised Joaquin, but a lot of people didn't praise the movie.
Yeah.
But I think what happened was Joker went in as sort of like well, this is a comic book movie. It's still in that genre. And then when it came out and people realized that, like, it's kind of not, like, it is, but it isn't, it started to draw in parts of the audience that would typically not line up and be super hyped for a
Yeah.
superhero comic book movie, but then
Yeah.
realize, wait, I got to go see this performance and I got to see this film. I think the Batman could go a little bit that way, where it's like it gets a little bit of the comic book crowd, which obviously wants to see this, but then it almost appeals more to, like, the serious film goer, like, that realizes, wait, yeah, it's a Batman movie, but it's far closer to, like a David Fincher movie, or a very serious, almost Oscar level movie, than it is to a fun, rollicking Marvel movie. And so I kind of feel like that's how the legs will evolve. It's going to be people who legitimately would, like, see the trailer and being like, pass, because they're like, it's just, I don't care about comic book movies or superhero movies. But then if it really delivers and there's real buzz, we'll be like, do I need to see this? Like, is this the one comic book movie I need to go see, because it's not really a comic book movie?
Yeah, I think you're gonna definitely get those.
Yeah. A week away.
A week away, right? And then, but there's gonna be people that seen. I think I'm gonna be MIA from Instagram and YouTube, because I don't want to hear or see anyone. I don't want to see anyone's disappointment, and B, I don't want people to spoil it for me with anything.
Yeah, I mean, the review embargo lifts on the 28th, so you'll have a couple days, a full week to react. So,
Are you gonna read any reviews?
yeah, I always do. I mean, like I said, I always try to read taglines. I don't like to read content, because reviews tend to have some spoilers in them. So I like to read headlines and sort of summaries and kind of things that just give me a feel for what people are gravitating toward and what they're undecided on, or what they're against. I like to have a sense of that going in, and I can kind of form my own opinion. So I'll be certainly aware of that. But yeah, no, I won't be messaging you on Wednesday after I go see it.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like I wanna know what you have to say. I want to sort of. I want to. Damn, it's gonna be a tough few days. I know you already has seen it, and I know you probably want to talk about it. And
We're not
I'm
doing the
seeing
spoiler-free review, I guess.
No. I mean, we can. You know what? We should. We should. For those people who want a good review, and I think you do good reviews, and you give your honest opinions, and we sort of fall in line in terms of what we kind of like. And so, yeah, I think we should do a spoiler-free review.
Then you can
But
watch Pablo be emotionally tortured on screen while we talk about a movie that I've seen that he hasn't. Yeah.
um, actually, you know how we're gonna do it? Because I'm gonna see it twice Friday. So
Yeah.
the next time we talk, we're gonna do a spoiler free review where you talk. I'm already have seen it, and then we'll get into a discussion about what we thought. Give our honest review of the film. But yeah, man, if you haven't gotten this book, definitely go check it out. Again, written by Dave Lumen, and it's an original movie novel inspired by the film, and is a very very interesting book. Some insight into some of the characters, and I'm hoping to see some references to that book, because it was really, I think it was really well written, for except for some parts, as you said. Thank God we're not getting that in the film, because I think that would have not ruined it, but certainly brought it down. Certainly brought it down. But yeah, that's our talk on the Batman, the prequel book, I guess. Um, and anything else would you like to add, Brian, before we get into the Nerd Gen report?
No, the only other thing, it was a little nostalgic to read this book because, as I said, I think when we were kids, the it was a little different. The storybook that went with big movies was like a lot of times the only way you could get information before a movie came out, and
Yeah.
and they would write these books based on rough cuts. And so you would like read like the Star Wars storybook, and you read, and like it would have stuff that actually wouldn't even make it into the final movie. But it was like your way of, like, if you were excited about something, to like get a preview of it. So I had that little bit of that feeling of like, I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh, they don't really do this anymore.
Yeah,
So they kind of have like a book tie-in to a film launch. So that was kind of cool.
What was cool for me is I haven't read a book in a long time, and that quickly too. One night I got it and read it, and then I was just waiting for Brian to read it. But if you haven't picked it up again, please pick it up. If you're excited for this movie as much as we are, and yeah, that'll be our show for the Batman. Listen, man, there's still gonna be a lot more conversations we'll have regarding the Batman before it comes out. I don't know if we'll do it. I think the next time, Brian, we'll talk about the movie is after it comes out, right?
Yeah, I think the next time we'll be taping after it comes out. I guess, like I said, the only question will be, do we tape between when I see it and you see it, or whether we just do kind of everything after you see it?
Yeah, well, I will do everything after I see it.
Okay. All right.
There'll probably be no Nerd Gen report for a couple of weeks, though. I got to put that out there, because I think all we're going to be talking about is this film, maybe. And
We'll
the
see. There's always a
reaction.
lot of news, though. News has been
Yes,
heating up so much. We may not be able to get away from that. But yeah,
True.
I am going to try to see it twice that weekend. Like I'm going Wednesday, and I'm going to try to go maybe Saturday or Sunday. You're seeing it twice on Friday, so yeah, I think it's a film that's going to need more than one
Definitely
viewing. Yeah,
definitely, because there's a lot of like the fact that you mentioned that they shot that driving sequence, no, visually everything was shot with a purpose, and to a believable story, no CGI, nothing crazy. Who knows if this sets the bar for Brian? I said this before, and I think we discussed it. What if the Batman, and the way this movie is shot, and perhaps depending how good it is and how people receive it, and makes a boatload of money, well, people have a different view looking at Marvel films,
uh,
because they're too different
well, I was going to say
styles.
I think the Batman has the opportunity to do something, has an opportunity to move the genre forward. I think, if Marvel wants its films to be viewed differently, they probably need to make some different films. To be quite honest, I mean,
But they tried that. with Eternals and
I get
people.
it, but I'm just saying, like, I think, Marvel has a color palette and a visual style, and like you're right, Eternals tried to get away from that. That was probably some of
Yeah,
the interesting aspects of it. But like I said, I think the Batman more exists in the, can this move the genre forward as, hey, you can adapt comics using different genres. You don't have to make it big explosions all the time or super bright colors and snappy one-liners. You can really play around with different kind of pieces of cinematic history and then just install a Batman or a Superman or whoever in the middle of your story. So that's where I think this movie has the opportunity. I don't know that it'll improve the standing of Marvel movies. I am curious. There's obviously so many notable directors who despise the MCU. I'm
I was
curious if
just thinking
any
about
of
that.
them actually view this particular film differently than those.
I was just thinking about that, Brian. I was like, I was just thinking about that right now. I'll be wondering what Martin Scorsese has to say or Ridley Scott had to say about this film. And
Or Francis Ford Coppola, since
yeah,
apparently Colin Farrell is channeling Fredo in his performance.
I know, right? It's like, come on. These guys, I think that when they see it, they're gonna perhaps change their mind a little bit. Because again, man, if I was a Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese and I'm doing certain type of films and Marvel's just coming in and just taking all the spotlight, you would feel a certain way, right? Um, and not to say that these guys are going to, when they see this movie, are going to jump into the superhero business. I doubt it, but I think they'll appreciate what Matt Reeves has done with this film. I think that's what I think is they're going to be focused on the artistry and the cinematography and all the things that they consider cinema, and they'll apply it to this movie and have good things to say about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's our show for today. We'll see you next time on the Nerd Generation. Next time, oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't wait.